So welcome everyone. The webinar is called Turning Insight into Action, how the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment can drive real change. So I'm Bruce Goldstein. I'm Executive Director of the Transformations Community. And I'm so pleased to be co-hosting this with Karen O'Brien from cCHANGE and Michael Schoon from the Society for Social Ecological Systems, or SocSES. And Haley Fitzpatrick is our Research and Initiatives Manager here at the Transformations Community. She's managing the webinar. As you all know, cCHANGE is a pioneering organization that links science and action with deep expertise in intertransformations and systemic change and integrative learning. And SocSES is a new organization, fantastic organization that focuses on just and sustainable transformations across social ecological systems. And for those of you who are new to the Transformations Community, or TC, I'll refer to it sometimes, we're a global network of action researchers and reflective practitioners, and we're working to advance just and regenerative sustainability transformation. I think we all share that goal. So over the past decade, the TC has supported initiatives that activate change through partnerships and experimentation, interdevelopment, and systems learning. You can go back one, we're not quite there. This year, alongside our conferences in New York and South Africa, we're focusing on how to sustain this work through shared infrastructure, including the Agora, which is our new platform for ethical, place-based, and reflective practice. So we see the TC, we folks who are involved in the Transformations Community, think of ourselves as a boundary organization for transdisciplinary scholars and practitioners. So in practice, that means convening spaces for collaboration and supporting the relational work needed to navigate complexity and helping a wide range of actors align around systems change. And from this perspective, the Transformative Change Assessment, produced by IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity Ecosystem Services, so I'll just refer to it as TCA from now on, can be seen itself as a kind of boundary object, so that the TCA is a kind of shared and adaptable framework that helps people in different roles and settings engage with the challenges of transformation in meaningful ways. So it doesn't offer one path forward, but it does give us a kind of common reference for collaboration and coordination while leaving room for adaptation and creativity. So today, we're exploring how the TCA can become a living resource for us now that it's done, right? Took a lot of work, but now we want to make it a catalyst for collective reflection, alignment, and action. Because its real power depends on how we bring it alive into our institutions and communities and collaborations. So the question we're sitting with today is, what does it take to activate the TCA? And how can boundary organizations like ours help make this happen? So next slide, please. So our plan is to start with brief reflections from the TCA co-leads and chapter authors. And then we'll head into breakout groups to connect their insights with your own work. And after that, we'll convene for a closing discussion among our partner organizations. And then we'll look forward to aligned action in this year and beyond. So next slide, please. So we're fortunate today to be joined by many of the key contributors to the TCA, including lead chapter authors and the IPBES leadership. So each of them brings a unique lens on how transformation happens, what barriers exist, and what actions are the most urgent. Next slide. So now I'm really excited to introduce our partners and co-hosts for today's events, who are both collaborators on the TCA and leaders in the global transformations ecosystem. So first over to you, Karen O'Brien, who's co-chair of the TCA and co-founder of cCHANGE, to say a few words about her organization, cCHANGE.
Great. Thank you, Bruce, and welcome to everybody to this webinar. It's really exciting to see so many people. As Bruce said, I was one of 3 co-chairs of the Transformative Change Assessment with Irwin Agrawal and Lucas Garibaldi, and I'm a professor of human geography at the University of Oslo. But 10 years ago, it really became clear that research alone is not enough and that we needed to really connect research and action for results. So we established cCHANGE in 2014 as a way of engaging society with transformations in a changing climate, transformations to sustainability, to link knowledge with action through a very integrative approach that links the practical, the political, and the personal spheres of transformation together. In other words, it's not just that we need to transform the systems and structures out there, but it's also about who we are and how we show up to create those changes. And really, the goal is on creating results that we can see. So, we have about 5 employees now, and we were in a co-working space and working with individuals, municipalities, schools, businesses, different types of organizations that are really concerned and caring about the types of transformative changes that the assessment itself points to as both necessary and urgent. So it's really wonderful to be collaborating with the transformations community and SocSES and others and all of you, because this is really necessary right now. So I will pass it then back to you, Bruce.
Yeah. Thanks, Karen. So now I'd like to invite Michael Schoon, who's one of the co-founders of SocSES, to introduce their work. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Bruce. Karen, that sounds great what you're doing. We have a number of organizations involved here that are really wrapped up in an ecosystem that's doing really similar things. So Society for Social Ecological Systems is a brand new boundary organization we launched in March. We have a paper an article that's coming out in Ecology and Society that's going to delve into the history and background and how we ended up where we are. But basically, we were looking for a home for social ecological systems researchers, practitioners, decision makers, policymakers, a place that they could all go and work together. I think we're going to hear a lot of the same words echoing over and over again, the desire for place-based work, for transdisciplinary work, for transformative work, a place where we can all come together and work and thrive. The aim of the society, let me read this here, is to advance and support social ecological systems-based research, practice, and action towards a just and sustainable future by providing an intellectual home, community, and identity for social ecological systems researchers, practitioners. This is really taking knowledge and putting it into action. We're excited to work with the TC community, with cCHANGE, with others in this constellation of related work to really see if we can make a difference. We're focusing on transdisciplinarity, social ecological systems research, education, and outreach. With that, Bruce, I'll turn it over so we can continue on.
Thanks, Michael. Perfect. So to orient us now, I'm going to hand things back over to Karen O'Brien for a 3-minute or so brief overview of the TCA, what it is, how it was developed, and why it matters now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Transformative Change Assessment, as you can see in our summary for policymakers, has a very long title that would take me 3 minutes to read, but it's the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and the determinants of transformative change and options for achieving the 2050 vision for biodiversity. So there's a lot in this, and it's a really exciting assessment because it came out after the 2019 global assessment, which really established the need for transformative change. And this follows on a number of IPCC reports that were also calling on this. So there's this talk about transformative change, but what does it actually mean? What does it look like? What do we know about that? So the Transformative Change Assessment was a 3-year process, and it involved 101 experts, many of whom are on this call, from 42 countries around the world. And within this group, we have a high proportion of social and interdisciplinary scientists. So lots of different perspectives brought together, which was really exciting and fruitful to really see what is the different dimensions of transformations. Our assessment drew on about 7,000 references, and in the process, we assessed about 800 visions that were aligned with the 2050 vision for biodiversity from all different types of time periods in different parts of the world. And we also collected about almost 400 case studies that show where change is happening around the world. It's really about the the transformative potential that exists and is here right now. So we analyze those as well. And as with every assessment, it was a science policy interface. So we got about 10,000 comments that we had to respond to. And I think everyone on the call who participated in those remembers what those were like. But I think what in the summary for policymakers, we tried to bring together the 5 chapters. And I should mention that we really tried to keep the chapters short and concise with supplementary material so that it's readable from chapter 1 to chapter 5, that they're not just standalone chapters. And in our summary for policymakers, we divided it into 3 parts. The first one being that transformative change is urgent, necessary, and challenging, but possible. And that, I think, is really an important message, especially at this time that we're in right now. The second point is that the second section was about strategies and actions for transformative change. In other words, what do we actually have to do differently if we want to realize the goals and objectives? And then third is enabling transformative change, the roles for all. And I think that is really like one of the big take-home messages that from today that will come through all of the chapters is that each and every one of us have a role to play. And no matter, it's not just about large scale changes, but small changes can have a really big influence. It's not what we do, but it's also how we do it. It's the direction of change. So this is a thread that runs through our assessment, and it's very exciting then to think about how to activate this community, because all of us who were participating in the assessment, no one wanted a report that sits on a shelf. As Bruce mentioned, how do we make it come alive? How do we actually put this into practice? And that's the role of boundary organizations, and why I'm really excited to be, taking this one step further or 2 steps further or 3 steps further collectively so that we can realize those changes. So I will pass it to you, Bruce, and then we can get...
Thanks, Karen. Perfect. So now let's hear 3 minutes from David O'Burr. He's chair of IPBES, to reflect on why the TCA matters to catalyze transformative change.
Thank you very much, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be here. Hopefully you can hear me well enough. My link is bad, Perfect. So I'm actually going to switch off my video after having switched it on, just to help with the voice. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having this session on the Transformative Change Assessment from IPBES. I'm the chair of IPBES for this current 3-year period. I have a science background myself. I was co-chairing the Nexus assessment before becoming the chair. So this assessment also is very close to my heart because they're so closely related to each other. For those that don't know IPBES so well, we are, in a sense, a boundary organization as well. The theme of this session, in terms of being on the boundary between science and policy and trying to bring science into policy contexts in understandable ways, and the summaries for policymakers are negotiated documents from the scientific assessments. And that negotiation is a very valuable process because it means that we can negotiate the messages between the scientists and the governments who have commissioned this study in the first place. So they're very interested in the topic. Some of the findings may be very threatening to aspects of governance, but that's the whole point. We want to have these assessments used and to influence policy. So the 2019 Global Assessment basically stated that no pathways to sustainability are possible without transformative change. That was adopted in the plenary. But then that also meant governments then asked, so what is transformative change? And so this topic was identified to be the headline for this assessment, and the team came together. The co-chairs, as Karen mentioned, there are 3 of them, and the CLAs and the authors, and we're going to hear from many of the CLAs presenting their chapters. So what the Transformative Change Assessment has done is it basically, on the positive side, it really drills down on key strategies and actions that can support transformative change. It does this by synthesizing a definition from the literature to really hone in on what does transformative change mean? What does one see that could qualify as transformative change? but then also going into the various barriers, enablers, and the strategies and actions themselves to help actors understand where they stand, their potential actions that they can take, and the collaborations that are needed to support transformative change. And in relation to this workshop, it really also highlights the critical role of boundary organizations and of facilitation and intermediaries to help guide transformative processes in uncertain and complex contexts. So I'll stop there, as at best we're very keen to see this assessment used and very happy to be part of the transformations community and carrying it forward. So thank you very much. I'll hand back to Bruce.
Thanks, David. All right, now that you've had an overview of the TCA, let's dive into each chapter for an intro. So each chapter team will now have 3 minutes maximum. We're going to try to enforce that since there is so much work that went into this and so many people. It's so hard to distill it to 3 minutes, but we're going to give it a shot so we can have time for breakouts. So our teams are going to share a key insight, a takeaway, and a provocation for discussion. Really encourage you to dive into the chapters yourself after we're done here. They're so rich. So these are just tasters to warm us up on the deeper conversations that we'll have in breakout rooms. So let's begin with Fern Wixon with Chapter 1, Framing Transformative Change.
Thanks so much, Bruce. And hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here to give you the taster of Chapter 1. So Chapter 1 is entitled Transformative Change for a Sustainable World. And you can see on the right there an image of the roadmap for the whole assessment, just to give you a flavor of what each of the chapters really have as their core focus. And Chapter 1, that big bar at the bottom, yellow, was about what is transformative change and why is it needed? We heard from David the big question of, yeah, okay, we need it, but what is it? So I'm going to focus a little bit on what we synthesized on that in Chapter 1. Next, please, Hayley. So I would say the core contribution of Chapter 1 is around the definition and the framework. And the first part of the definition we have is that transformative change is defined as fundamental system-wide shifts in views, structures, and practices. And that sort of golden spiral of views, structures, and practices is the first part of our framework for transformative change. And views, structures, and practices are terms that are overarching. By views, we mean ways of seeing, thinking, knowing, structures, ways of organizing, governing, regulating, practices, ways of doing, behaving, and relating. So transformative change changes all of those together, right? But we, in our assessment, are not interested in transformative change just in a general sense, because you could have transformative change in lots of different directions, and you could argue that we're seeing a kind of transformative change right now, but not necessarily in a direction that's favorable. So we, in our assessment, focused on deliberate transformative change. We're doing it intentionally, and we're oriented to a just and sustainable world. And we said for that, we have to shift views, structures, and practices in ways that address the underlying causes of biodiversity loss. So views, structures, and practices represents the breadth of transformative change, while the underlying causes really represent the depth. So what do we mean by underlying causes? Let's take us forward. Thanks, Hayley. So the underlying causes that we identified in Chapter 1 from a synthesis of available knowledge were 3: disconnection from and domination over nature and people, concentration of power and wealth, and prioritization of short-term individual and material gains. So things like the global assessment have identified the direct drivers of biodiversity loss and the indirect drivers. And we said the underlying causes lie beneath and influence all those drivers. And more than that, they're also these sort of interconnected social and cultural patterns that have historically co-evolved and are continuing to reinforce one another. And we're saying that at the moment, our views, structures, and practices are holding and maintaining those underlying causes. So the depth of transformative change is really getting down to break these deep patterns. How do we do that? We do that through embodying and advancing counter values, which we identified in the transformative change assessment as these. We see these in the literature, in the knowledge: equity and justice, pluralism and inclusion, respectful and reciprocal human nature relations, and adaptive learning and action. And we say you have to be moving these principles forward to really get transformative change that breaks the underlying causes. And our kind of provocation that we were asked to give is really that what happens if we don't dig down to the underlying causes? Well, all our well-intentioned efforts, everything we're doing right now to try and improve the situation of the polycrisis, biodiversity loss, climate change, pollution, they look great in practice, but they're not bending the curves. They're not changing the scenarios. And we're saying unless you get to those underlying causes, we're going to be doing wonderful things that are not making any difference. So that's us. That's a taster of chapter 1. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Fern. Yeah, and everyone, you'll have a chance to choose a room and talk more with the authors during our breakouts. So let's go on to chapter 2. So Sebastian Del Sante and Lynn Shannon, chapter 2, Visions for a Sustainable World. Take it away.
I've been volunteered to speak for my chapter, so I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. So we were working on visions, and we had a lot of fun with that. And visions really anchor pathways. So they are the endpoints of pathways that then provide us with direction for our actions and for behavior of actors to change what they're doing. And what we did is we actually looked at 881 visions, not just 800, and we assessed these and came up with some key themes of those visions, which you can see in the figure on the screen there. We analyzed sources from indigenous and local knowledge, scientific literature, the arts, the legal realm, you name it, economics specifically. We looked at all kinds of different topics, and we looked at all different scales, different sectors, and different geographical regions. You have the next slide, please, Haley? Okay, so visioning is an iterative process, and it has the potential to really transform the way we are within our world. And it's iterative because one identifies where a group of actors would like to go, and then pathways to get where we're going, and then life happens. The initial state is now a different state, and one then goes through a series of different iterations. And the process of visioning can be seen as a kind of cooking process where the main ingredients are scope. So that would be whether the scope of a vision is very narrow or much broader. Sharing in terms of the number and kinds and spread of actors involved in that. Imagination, which we'll come to a little bit later. And then flexibility, our ability to respond. And next slide, please, onto the findings. The case studies of transformative change that were analyzed, those that had visions behind them, those that were really based on specific visions, were much more positive in terms of addressing socioeconomic and nature's contributions to people outcomes. So visions really played an important role there in getting us where we're wanting to go. The cases that had visions of or from indigenous and local communities, things that promoted those values, they were associated with much more positive social, economic, and environmental outcomes. And then on our vision database of our 881, where those visions where we had more participation, greater levels of participation, and that covered a number of different drivers, indirect drivers, direct drivers, and social ecological outcomes. Those were really much more transformative. They had greater potential to be transformative. Next slide, please. So in terms of practically being relevant here, global visions show us that transitioning towards a planet where both nature and people thrive is possible, but it will really mean that we have to fundamentally change what we're doing. We have to change mindsets and we have to change paradigms. And we have to shift from existing ways of doing things to, for example, alternative economic approaches and institutional structures. So collective visioning can provide equitable and sustainable futures, and it can do this by aligning goals across different frameworks, such as the Sustainable Development Goals. Integrating action that links biodiversity and climate targets is really important and enables us to be able to address things like the 2050 vision for global biodiversity, but also other global frameworks and agreements, including the climate ones. Oh, you shot my slide off. Okay, let me.
We're a little over time, Lynn, so we should probably.
That's fine. I was going to highlight that we are missing imagination in the process of visioning and in the visions that we develop, and that there's a huge gap there. And so I was wanting us to think a little bit about that in the breakout groups. So I'll leave it there in the interest of time.
Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, and we'll have plenty of time to go into the nitty-gritty when we get on the breakouts. So let's go on to chapter 3. Ansi Biggs will tell us how transformative change happens.
Thanks, Thanks, Bruce. Yes, that tiny question was the key focus of chapter 3. We can go to the next slide. So this is the 3-minute high-level quick overview. I think the key contribution from chapter 3 was really to do this, I have to say, very big review of, it kind of felt like all the literature under any discipline. We started more with the sustainability literature, but we quickly expanded far, far beyond that. In the end, we went in depth on 62 theories, methods, and frameworks, and to try to make sense of this and kind of distill it in a way that's usable. We clustered these through a big analysis of the underlying assumptions and the ways that they see transformative change happening. And we pulled out 6 broad approaches to transformative change. And I think this is really the key contribution from this chapter, is to think about these really different ways that really different disciplines and different schools of thought and different types of actors approach transformative change. And I think what is also really nice is when we then connected it back to the definition of transformative change developed in chapter 1, we also realized that these different approaches actually speak to very different or emphasize different entry points. So, for instance, structural approaches really focus on changing structures. Inner transformation is really focused on views, etc. And we have some that work at the intersection. Next slide. So this is just kind of a short table, but in the chapter we go into some depth and provide examples of each of these chapters. But as I said, the key thing that we pulled out is that each of these approaches are rooted in a set of assumptions. And they also then point and kind of a set of assumptions and ways that we understand the world works. And they point to different kinds of sets of interventions that are generally also done by different actors. So again, for instance, the structural interventions are often around changing policies or rules or laws and are often in the domain of government. Whereas, for instance, the empowerment approaches are focused much more on social movements and building grassroots networks, and those are often civil society organizations. The other important point to make here is that, if we can just go back quickly, is that Indigenous and local knowledge is a key part of the IPBES assessments, and there was a lot of discussion about whether that is an approach in itself. But ultimately, after a lot of reflection, we really realized that it's not something separate from these different approaches, but rather that it has a really important contribution to make to each of these approaches. Next slide. And then the key takeaway is, I think in this assessment, maybe initially people were thinking we might find there's some approaches that are better than others or stronger. But I think what we really realized is that different approaches and different, particularly combinations of approaches, are more appropriate in different contexts. So, for instance, I'm based in South Africa, and in Africa, many places, maybe the government is not as strong, and then that might not be the main entry point that you would use in that context, although it might work in combination with other kinds of entry points, for instance, with civil society organizations. So I think the key thing is really about the need to kind of weave together these different approaches rather than try to pick one or feel that some of these approaches are better than others. And generally, working with them together has more potential for bringing about change. And the reflection I wanted to leave people with is basically we want to bend the curve by bringing these approaches together. And I think the discussion that would be really interesting is to think, and I found that really useful for myself, is to think and understand what approaches does your work mostly focus on? And particularly then, where could you actually have partnerships with people that are having other approaches that might complement some of the shortcomings of your approach? Thanks.
Thanks, Hansi. I know this is a challenge given the vast extent of the information here. So on to chapter 4. So Nikki Franciszkaki, you're going to share your insights or the chapter's insights on overcoming barriers to change.
Well, I will pass to my very good colleague Sergio, who is going to present today, but we are all here from chapter 4. So Sergio, up to you.
Hello, everyone. And thank you very much for your invitation. Yes, chapter 4, we are the CLAs, Nikki Franciszkaki, myself, and Ed Carr. All of us are here. We were working on why transformative change has not happened, why we cannot transform. And the title of our chapter is Overcoming the Challenges of Achieving Transformative Change Towards a Sustainable World. Next, please. What we did in our chapter was to try to show what are the main barriers, what are the main challenges we're facing and why we cannot transform, and put those challenges together in the framework of the global assessment together with our own framework, as you will see in that figure. And we show that we found 5 main challenges that are systemic, persistent, and pervasive, and they are blocking the change. They are interrelated and blocking the change of our indirect and indirect drivers that are taking our world to a wrong side. And they are also related to our underlying causes. The 5 main challenges we detected them by our own by using our own expertise in our team. We had a huge and very nice team of leading authors that were working together with us, and we detected with them and doing a huge literature review 5 main challenges, and those are persistent relation of domination, particularly those that emerged were propagated in colonial eras. The second one is economic and political inequalities. The third one is inadequate policies and unfit institutions. The fourth one is unsustainable consumption and production patterns and individual habits and practices. And the last one is limited access to clean technologies and uncoordinated knowledge and innovation systems. You will see them in the next slide, together in association with the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and our views, structures, and practices. But at the same time, you will see in this wheel here outside the 5 main challenges together associated to 3 to 5 barriers. Those overarching challenges to transformative change show up in those barriers that reflects our way of thinking, doing, organizing, relating, and knowing. So we have to tackle those barriers if we want to transform. And there are several examples of those barriers. We present some of them. I have no time to talk about them now. But for example, our resource concentration, our wealth and power shaping policy, the telecouplings, many of them are presented in that wheel in our chapter. And then we also mapped the case study database from our assessment together with our 5 main challenges, and you will see that they map very well. The percentage in this slide are the percentage of challenges represented in those case studies. And we also present some examples of barriers that prevent transformative change or reinforce the status quo, as this example of the vicious cycle of political and economic inequalities, how we are reinforcing this. And finally, in our chapter, we present some case studies where we show that, for example, in ocean fisheries or land subsidies case studies, we show that several of the challenges of the barriers are interrelated, and they are present in different ecosystems and geographies. And to end our chapter, we show some ways of overcoming and open to chapter 5, that is the next chapter that we'll present now. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergio. Wow, this is drinking from the fire hose, isn't it? Well, you all have a chance to dive further in once we get to breakouts. And we have one more chapter introduction before we get there. So this one's dear to my heart, participated in it. And my friend Hannah Gosnell is here to tell us about strategies and actions for enabling transformative change.
Well, thanks, Bruce. And yes, it was so great to have you on this chapter. And hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here and for your interest in this assessment. Chapter 5 had the incredibly challenging task of identifying and agreeing upon a set of high-level strategies and actions that could be woven together to address the direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss and nature's decline, as well as those underlying causes identified in Chapter 1. So in a nutshell, the 5 strategies involve conserving and regenerating places of value to nature and people, and I highlight the word regenerating as something kind of new and that we were offering, driving systemic change in the sectors most responsible for biodiversity loss and nature's decline, transforming economic systems for nature and equity, transforming governance systems to be integrative, inclusive, accountable, and adaptive, and shifting societal views and values to recognize and prioritize fundamental interconnections between humans and nature. So I'll just say a little bit more about each of those and then look forward to discussing them more in the breakout session. Next slide. So strategy 1 is about conservation that involves sustainable stewardship, notably by indigenous peoples and local communities. And a key idea here is that transformative change is really not needed everywhere. There are a lot of places around the world disproportionately managed by indigenous peoples where things are actually going pretty well. And first and foremost, we need to focus on enhancing the legal protection of those places, along with the rights of indigenous peoples and nature's rights. Next slide. Strategy 2 highlights what can be done in the economic sectors that heavily contribute to biodiversity loss, including agricultural and livestock, fisheries, forestry, infrastructure, mining, and fossil fuels. And this strategy focuses on regulating exploitation, embedding sustainability into industrial practices, and reforming financial incentives that drive environmental destruction. Next slide. Strategy 3 is about transforming dominant economic and financial paradigms so that they prioritize nature and social equity over private interests. And here we highlight actions such as reforming financial institutions, removing harmful subsidies, adopting alternative measures of success beyond GDP, and supporting just transitions to sustainable well-being economies. And this figure here highlights how inadequate current global biodiversity funding is, and it attempts to quantify the global biodiversity financing gap. Next slide. So strategy 4 argues that inclusive, accountable, and adaptive governance systems play a pivotal role in driving transformative change by involving diverse stakeholders and marginalized voices in decision-making, integrating biodiversity values across governance sectors, and strengthening global accountability mechanisms. Next slide.
Oh, you got that. Can you mute? Thanks.
And then finally, strategy 5, which is the one Bruce and I worked on, is about shifting dominant societal views and values to recognize and prioritize human-nature interconnectedness. And this strategy really tries to get at those underlying causes of biodiversity loss identified in Chapter 1, especially the disconnection from and domination over nature and people, and the prioritization of short-term individual and material gains. Next slide. These shifts can be facilitated through, among other ways, through new cultural narratives and by changing dominant social norms and facilitating transformative learning processes, co-creating new knowledge, and then weaving different knowledge systems and worldviews and values that recognize human nature interdependencies and ethics of care. And I just want to finish by highlighting this beautiful figure that Valerie Nelson, who's here today, she'll be helping facilitate for Chapter 5. Valerie and her colleague Helen Wheeler put together this amazing figure because it does a really nice job of portraying how we need to move from relations of domination to relations of care. And circling back to strategy 1, it shows how those relations of care that we need to foster already exist in indigenous and relational philosophies and ways of being like Ubuntu, Whakapapa, Sumak Kausai, and Suma Kamanya. So for the Chapter 5 breakout group, one thing we could discuss would be, where do you see some of these shifts happening already? And how are the barriers and challenges identified in Chapter 4 being overcome?
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. Wow. Thanks to our presenters. So now is the fun part. For you, you get to engage with our authors and with one another and explore some dimension of one of the chapters. And you can even switch rooms if you like to. So you'll have an opportunity now to self-select into a room for the chapter that most resonates with your interest. And the chapter authors are going to facilitate the discussion. So the breakout discussions are going to last about 20 minutes, and Haley will broadcast the time remaining. So again, if the room feels too full or too quiet, or you're welcome to return to the main room and we'll help you move. We want to keep the energy balanced between the rooms and have an opportunity to interact. We'll have a Google Doc link for each for the rooms that will be shared in chat. Each group can designate one note taker to briefly capture key insights. And we also would like the facilitators to designate or have or volunteer someone to take notes and to come back with a 1-minute summary that we will share after we come back from breakouts. So we're going to put the discussion prompts, that is, also in chat. It'll also be available in the rooms. And those 3 questions: what are the key takeaways from this chapter that resonate with your work? And how do you think boundary organizations like the Transformations Community, cCHANGE, and SocSES, and others can support the application, the bringing into action of these insights? Finally, what pathways can you see for integrating TCA insights into practice? What other kinds of pathways? So we're going to do that now. So why don't you go ahead and select the room you'd like to be in. And if you have any questions about that, you can put it in chat or ask us over the open air. Welcome back. Hope you had a great discussion. I popped in on a few. They were really engaging. So now we're going to hear from each breakout room. So each room has a designated reporter, and if you didn't designate one facilitator, you can jump in or choose somebody. And the idea is that we'll share a reflection from the group. We want these to run no more than 2 minutes. It can be less, but no more than 2, just so we can stay on schedule. And so let's jump in with chapter 1.
Ruth Fletcher, you can go straight ahead. Thanks for being our representative.
Thank you. Thanks. I was really fascinated to join this group. I'm really interested to explore this idea of disconnecting from nature, and that was the topic that came up first in terms of the key takeaways. And it was really interesting to hear that the disconnect from nature, there didn't seem to be any difference in terms of power or structures. At all levels, there is a disconnect, and at all levels, we are connected. We're all dependent ultimately. So there was a lot of enthusiasm over the report in general, of course, and real inspiration that governments have signed up to this and have approved this report as part of their work. There was also some discussion around food systems transformation. So interested in the fact around this domination over food and, meat products and so on. Another point that came up was around farmers, and that even farmers in really industrialized spaces also feel connected to nature, so that there was not necessarily a difference on the style of farming, and that connection still existed in those spaces where people still work with the land. And then we moved on to discussions around pathways for integrating the work, and education came up as one in terms of integrated into educational systems. Then there was a challenge around sustainability of funding, and that became a topic of discussion around the donor countries pulling out of funding in developing spaces, and that being hugely challenging for sustainability of actions. And a really interesting insight around the responsibility of national governments raising domestic funding to partner with international funding to make things more resilient. Also commenting around...
I think we'll have to move on. So perhaps a quick concluding statement?
There was a concluding statement was that we need to think about environmental defenders, and that there are challenges and opportunities around supporting them, and violence against them needs to be addressed.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that was ideal. Let's go over to chapter 2.
So we had a small but enthusiastic group discussing the transformations, and specifically this idea of the imagination gap and what could be done around that. People mostly spoke about the different ways that they were already addressing this in their own research or in their research in different communities. The idea with the imagination gap was also like to find new and better ways to relate with nature. And some people talked about biomimicry, or like having nature inspire us, that we don't have to go into a different direction, but nature can inspire us. We spoke a little bit after we shared our different practices about the importance of how do we fund these new ways of and odd ways and out of the box ways of thinking, and also how to address issues of acceptance within our own research fields for new ways of thinking and new forms of research. And there was a lot of enthusiasm about the assessment and the ways that it can anchor and guide our research as we move forward. And a mention was made of the World Biodiversity Forum is also looking in this direction, looking at an art-science interface, and that would be something useful to tie in as well.
Excellent. Perfect. Thanks, Adrienne. Let's go on to chapter 3.
So there was a lot of recognition across of the connections across these various literatures, and appreciation for the amount of work that had been done in order to bring these 6 different approaches to transformative change into existence. Then we really had a long conversation about the need to not take one approach and how you would turn, in particular, as you tried to turn these 6 approaches into practice. And the fact that perhaps what needed to happen was a weaving together of these different approaches. And in order to bring about the kind of whole system, the systemic change that's being discussed. So people question how it would work in practice. And is there sort of one expert that would be needed who has knowledge of all 6 of these disciplines, or is it a whole bringing a bunch of people in? And how does the power, navigating the power arrangement between people who have that knowledge and people who may not have all that knowledge work in order to keep the change process fair and sort of equally available to everyone? And then we had a small debate about what is transformative change at the scale that's needed. Can it be done at the local level? And how does that then scale to the more whole system level at bigger scales, which is where the assessment sees the change being needed. So I think that covers it.
Yeah, perfect, Sandra. I appreciate it. Yeah, and you sound look like a lounge singer with that big mic there. So let's go on to chapter 4. There you go. That's true. Chapter 4, Overcoming Barriers to Change.
I think I'll take this. I think I'm the last CLA standing from chapter 4, so we'll go from there. So I think most of our discussion centered around our chapter figure, which was what was it? Marcus called it the figure of beautiful complexity, the circle with all the challenges and barriers and rings around the view structures and practices, and kind of presented that quickly to everyone as not just a conceptual diagram, but also a diagram that showed you how you might be able to take action, how barriers become entry points to systemic change. And the reactions to that were, an appreciation for the fact that we were specifically characterizing barriers. In other words, not simply saying, money gets in the way and that's why things don't happen, but actually looking at all the different manifestations of barriers and how those provide entry points in. So it's not all just one entry point about money or power or something like that, but that money and power show up in lots of places and in lots of different ways. There was a number of questions around where justice was in this chapter, justice, power, and that kind of thing, which were manifest very, very overtly in our first and second challenges, but really present, as Ismail, one of our lead authors, pointed out, really was present in every barrier and every challenge, and of course is present across the entire assessment if you start from chapter 1 and work your way across. We didn't have a challenge that specifically said, hey, justice is a challenge. It was something that was permeating all of the challenges. And then really quickly, I just had an example. I think people were interested in how you might take this up. And of course, when we're thinking about justice, one of the questions is, whose knowledge counts, who gets to speak, whose values are counted here. And one of our participants who works at the American Museum of Natural History is already talking about how they're bringing together workshops with folks in the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues and how this might be something that can inform some of those kinds of conversations. So I'll leave it there and let you go to chapter 5.
Excellent. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, now on to strategies and actions for enabling change.
I've been designated, I believe. So we had a good conversation that I think revolved around two things. On the one side, kind of enthusiasm and examples of uptake of this framing of 5 strategies or possible pathways for making it happen. And then there, for example, I talked about how it's helpful to clarify and validate some of the work we're doing connected to transformative change in more explicit ways, but also help us understand where we're not doing the work and where there might be opportunities to partner. And Simon, who was in our group, emphasized how radical this is and provided an example of how there's a platform trying to make it more visible already efforts in this regard. So go look at the notes for that. And then the second part of I would say the other side of the conversation was about probing additional strategies or additional dimensions. How was this considered? How was that considered? And I'll just leave you with a few key terms that were mentioned in that discussion. How about complexity and leadership? How about not just boundary organizations, but boundary concepts like just transitions? How about ways to give validity to alternative mindsets? How about going beyond cognitive learning, such as spiritual practices? And finally, what about context, the context in which these strategies unfold? Very importantly right now, like war versus a peace or democracy versus a dictatorship. So it was an interesting, fascinating discussion.
Perfect. Thanks, Anna. So now in our remaining time, we've got about 15 minutes, a little less. We want to explore how boundary organizations like the Transformations community, like cCHANGE and SocSES, can support people to engage with the TCA in meaningful and sustained ways. So, how do our organizations, these organizations that support us, enable us to carry this forward into our own setting? So, Karen, why don't I start with you? You've emphasized in your work that transformation is not just about structures and systems. It's also about relationships and interchange. So from your perspective, what kind of practices will help make something like the TCA genuinely usable? And how can cCHANGE and its programs and all the things that support them?
Yeah, and it's an important question. And I might have mentioned earlier that we have a user guidance annex in the summary for policymakers that gives like 10 steps that walk you through the different processes of change. But how do we put it into practice? And that really does take practice because, to bring together what Unsi talked about, to the different ways of knowing, the different knowledge systems, to weave together different ways of shifting systems and structures, we actually have to show up differently. And so we help organizations through programs and seminars and strategic action planning and things to really think about like who I am and how I show up to shift those systems and structures, as we heard in chapter 4, not in the abstract level, but in the very specific level. And this is really, I think that we really need to, as a community, to recognize the importance of being strategic, because the types of transformations that we're seeing that Fern talked about shifting views, structures, and practices, they're not leading to a just and sustainable world right now. And this is very deliberate. So our deliberate transformations have to work together as a community of practice among all of us to start to, how do we not just do research with impact, but how do we be researchers with impact, practitioners with impact? How do we switch the conversations in that political sphere? How do, working with people who don't necessarily share our worldview or goals and things. And so I think there's a lot of skills and what we would call transformative capacities to unleash the transformative potential that is so evident in the assessment and which is so necessary and urgent in the world today.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Michael, over to you. So what are you seeing in SocSES? What kind of capacities are you developing that could make the TCA more impactful?
Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about this, that some of the key words that keep coming up in the discussions that I kept hearing about throughout the call today around uncertainty and the need to build resilience, about the need for inclusion, things like this. And so I was thinking about some of the work that built on or developed into SocSES coming from the resilience community, the Resilience Alliance and the Resilience Conferences of the past that I know many of you have been a part of. And one of the key sources of resilience is about broadening participation. I feel that many of us see a world of that's increasingly uncertain, that many of the anchors that have held us in place for a long time positively, anchors of community, anchors of religion, anchors of society, anchors of our organizations, many of these have been cut adrift through various forces from globalization and so on. And so we need a place for community, for building, for participating, for working together. We need a place that we can do things. So SocSES is a place that is formed in part or in large part because of this. We've tried to set this up, the organization, differently than a lot of traditional old school academic organizations that have a biannual conference, and that's what you do. Read the journal if you want more interaction. And we've tried to change this to focus on thematic streams. These streams are built around working groups. The streams are things like collaborative governance, adaptation and transformation, resilience, modeling, and theory. And within those, there are people working on specific things. So each of these thematic streams has activities that are ongoing throughout the year so that there is building a sense of community through webinars, trainings, different discussion sessions, and so on, things like this beyond just the annual or biannual conferences. We're trying to do things. This is really important. I was fortunate to come out of the Ostrom workshop, and there were two things that I'd like to emphasize that I see happening again through SocSES. One is that the Ostrom workshop called itself a workshop because it was a place to do. You are working, you are doing. And I think this is really important. We need to move beyond theorizing and just publishing things and hoping somebody reads some obscure journal article. We need to do, we need to engage. This is transdisciplinary. It needs to be with practitioners, not just academics. We need to be involved with decision makers and help guide, influence, and make those decisions. The second thing about calling it a workshop, is that it's a place for artisanship. There was such amazing artisanship in the IPBES report. You can see it in all of these super interesting, cool, informative, creative diagrams and so on that really bring these ideas to life. So I would just say, I would encourage people, if you're interested in getting involved, join SocSES. In September, we're going to have another call for more thematic streams. If there are ideas that resonate that you think would be new, there's an opportunity. I'll stop there. Thanks, Bruce.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I really passionately share this sense that we need more support structures for all the work we do, and we need to be able to inform each other about all the capacity building efforts we do. We've noticed that people in our field are entrepreneurs. They're often starting things up, but it's hard to find folks who want to participate, and it's hard to scale them up. So that's what the transformations community is really focusing on right now. We have this new initiative we're calling the Agora, like the Greek gathering place, and it's kind of a shared space where transdisciplinary initiatives can connect and reflect and coordinate. So we're looking forward to supporting your efforts in SocSES and in cCHANGE, and in sort of elevating their visibility, and also providing opportunities for entrepreneurs like you, Karen, and you, Michael, and your colleagues to come together and share ideas about how we can be more impactful and how we can reach more people and have more impact. So I think we're running, we got a few minutes. So I want to put out a provocation to both you, Karen and Michael, which is, how do you think we could work together? How do you think we could bring together all these initiatives that we have in our community, our kind of ecosystem of startup initiatives, and collaborate in ways that would support the TCA? What opportunities could we come together on to make sure that this report has impact? Karen, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's I think that's really what we want as a community is to have something like this kind of coherence and support for each other. And it's a lot easier to do that around specific events or initiatives or projects rather than just saying in an abstract memorandum of understanding. And that's why creating spaces for people to come together is important, because at these conferences, people plan things, they connect, they start to work on things together. And it's in some ways we never know what actually arises from our just very chance meetings and collaborations. So I think that to have the scaffolding for the community and to be able to have an easier network things, because especially now, I think Ed called the wheel of the challenges, the wheel of torture. And I think many of us are feeling tortured right now by the transformative changes that are going on. And the more people we can get together and realize that there are millions of people doing really good stuff and the transformative potential is there, then we can work very strategically as a group to really plan for the, to design for the future that we know is necessary and urgent.
Thanks, Karen. Michael, we're winding down. Do you have a minute or two of reflections on this one?
Sure. Just 1 minute. I'd like to emphasize a word that Karen mentioned, and that was about creating space. I know Danilo Meadows talked about this in Thinking in Systems, about the need to create space. I think that this is what we're trying to do, how we could work together. Also reiterating what Karen said, I think we should be specific. We've talked about collaborating and co-hosting conferences. I think these ideas are great. Co-hosting seminars, trainings, doing things together as a group. We want to be inclusive, work together, collaborate, and really strengthen the broader community, not try to parse off something. We want to be kind of lumpers and joiners, not splitters and dividers.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, that's with the Transformations Community Conferences. We think of them as opportunities for all of us to come together. This year, we're partnering with the Earth Systems Governance Network, and we're hoping to perhaps partner with you in the years to come with SocSES.
Great.
So I think that's about all we have time for. So before we close, I just want to thank all of our authors, all of our participants, David and Karen, who are also keynote speakers at our meeting at Johannesburg in the fall. Laura Pereira is our local host at Wits University. And as I mentioned, we're working with ESG. And so thank you all, authors, for this amazing effort, years of work, putting together thousands of references and making meaning out of all the work we've been doing. Your kind of work grounded in care and collaboration and long-term thinking is harder to sustain, as we've noted. I'm in the US and elsewhere, we're not just seeing hostility to our values like social justice and sustainability. We're experiencing direct attacks on our institutions that support science, education, and democracy, things we thought were beyond question. So that's why it really matters to come together in spaces like this to reflect and stay connected and to strengthen our relationships and practices and carry this work forward even in these difficult times. So we hope this session has sparked new insights and new connections and new energy for your work. We'll be posting this video and the summary, and we'd be happy to share it in any platform that folks would recommend. We hope you stay engaged with cCHANGE and SocSES. Hopefully we have a link in the chat and the Transformations community and the many other partners who are bringing the Transformative Change Assessment into practice. And so please join us in Johannesburg. We're going to have sessions in August, and Karen and David are going to be leading some discussions there, as we've noted. Early bird registration available until May 18th. I have to say that. Haley and Thomas are posting links now in the chat to help you stay connected with the TC as well as cCHANGE and SocSES. So thanks, everyone. Thank you again for being part of our community and for your commitment for turning insight into action. So thanks, everyone, and goodbye for now.